The wind howled through the canyon that night, carrying the sharp scent of rain and dust. The plains stretched endlessly, broken only by the flickering light of distant campfires and the groan of thunder that rolled across the blackened sky. Somewhere between the storm clouds and the dry earth, a young woman stumbled through the darkness, her torn dress clinging to her legs, her breath ragged. She didn't know where she was anymore. The wagon trail had disappeared hours ago, swallowed by the storm. Her boots sank into the mud, and with each step, she whispered a prayer that anyone might hear her. She had been part of a small caravan heading west, chasing the dream of land and freedom that so many settlers spoke of. They had crossed rivers and plains, seen buffalo herds thunder across the horizon, and slept under the stars. But then came the raid. Horses in the night, wild cries echoing off the cliffs, and the flash of gunfire that tore through the camp. When the smoke cleared, she had run blindly, desperately until the world turned black and the rain came down in sheets. With the storm beating against her, she was certain the wilderness would swallow her whole. Lightning cracked overhead, revealing for an instant the jagged outline of a canyon wall ahead. She didn't see the figure watching her from the shadows of the ridge, a tall man on horseback, his face painted with the colors of the storm itself. He had been tracking her since dawn, moving silent as the wind, unseen among the rocks. His people called him Lone Hawk, one of the last of the Apache warriors who had not yet surrendered to the soldiers pushing deeper into their land. To him, this woman was a mystery, a lost settler wandering where few dared to go. Died. Yet something in her frightened movements stirred a sense of duty in him, an instinct older than words. Below, the woman slipped on the wet stones and fell hard. Her ankle twisted beneath her weight, and she cried out in pain. For a moment she thought she saw movement above something shifting against the lightning, but the storm swallowed it up again. She tried to crawl beneath a rock ledge, her hands trembling as the wind roared like a living thing. The night felt endless, the darkness pressing in from every side. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, the world seemed to fade into the sound of thunder. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious when she felt the heat of a small fire on her face. Her eyelids fluttered open, and she saw him, the stranger, sitting nearby, his back to her, feeding sticks into the flames. The storm still raged beyond the narrow shelter, but here, inside the canyon hollow, there was warmth and light. His hair was long, tied back with a strip of leather, and his shoulders were marked with faint scars that spoke of battles fought long ago. He said nothing at first, only handed her a piece of dried meat and motioned for her to eat. She hesitated, her fear rising again, but hunger and cold won over. "Who are you?" she managed to ask, her voice barely more than a whisper. He turned slowly, the firelight flickering across his face. "No need for names," he said quietly, his English broken but steady. "Storm will pass. Then you go." She wanted to believe that, but deep down she knew she couldn't. Her wagon was gone, her people scattered, and she had no sense of where the nearest town might be. The world beyond the firelight felt too wide, too wild. "They're gone," she said softly. "All of them. I don't know where to go." He watched her for a moment, then looked toward the mouth of the canyon. "Not safe here," he said. "Soldiers ride. Bay hunt Apache. They see you with me, they shoot both." His words carried no anger, only fact. Her heart sank. She didn't understand why he had helped her at all. Yet there was something in his eyes, something steady and kind, though worn by years of struggle. She could see he wasn't much older than she was, but the weight he carried was ancient. The fire crackled between them, and for a long time neither spoke. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm, the kind that filled the night with quiet sorrow. She thought of her home back east, the smell of her mother's bread, the songs her father would hum when the sun set. All of it felt like another life. Here, surrounded by red rock and wind, that world seemed to belong to someone else. Then, through the dim light, she noticed something, a fresh cut on his arm, deep and bleeding. "You're hurt," she said, moving toward him. He didn't react at first, but when she reached for his arm, he finally turned his head, surprised. She tore a strip from her sleeve and wrapped it around the wound as best she could. "Why you care?" he asked. She looked at him, her hand still trembling. "Because you saved me," he said nothing more. But when she finished, he gave a small nod of respect, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Outside, the thunder rolled again. The storm wasn't done yet. He stood, listening. The sound of horses drifted faintly through the rain, distant, but real. "Soldiers," he muttered, grabbing his bow. "They come close." Fear gripped her heart. "What do we do?" He looked down at her, his face calm but tense. "You stay quiet," he said. "If they find us, you say nothing. Understand?" She nodded, clutching the blanket tighter around her shoulders. The fire was quickly smothered, and the hollow fell into darkness once more. She could hear the drip of rain from the rocks above, the snort of his horse, and the faint jingle of metal from beyond the canyon. Every heartbeat felt like an echo in the stillness. As the riders drew nearer, she could make out the harsh sound of their voices, rough and slurred. The way men sound when fear hides behind drink and command. She couldn't see their faces, only the glint of rifles and the flash of lightning that illuminated their outlines. They stopped at the mouth of the canyon, and for a moment she thought they might pass by, but one of them called out, "You there? We know you're out here." Apache warrior's hand brushed her arm gently, a silent warning.
Sorry.
She pressed herself against the stone, her breath caught in her throat. "Got word from the trail," the voice continued. "A woman run off after the raid. You've seen her?" No one answered. The thunder broke again, drowning their words, and in that brief moment, the warrior moved quiet and swift as the wind. She couldn't see what he did, only that the horses below shifted uneasily, the men muttering curses. When the lightning flashed once more, the canyon was empty again. The riders moved on, their torches bobbing away into the storm. He returned minutes later, his face hard, his chest rising with slow, steady breaths. "They go north," he said. "We leave soon." Her legs were weak, her heart still pounding. "Where will we go?" she asked. He looked toward the far end of the canyon, where the stormlight flickered like fire in the clouds. "To the mountains," he said. "There, they do not follow." She hesitated, the thought of climbing into that vast, unknown land sending a chill through her. "Why are you helping me?" He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. "Because once," he said softly, "someone helped me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and simple. She didn't ask more. The wind shifted then, bringing with it the scent of pine and distant smoke. Somewhere out there, the promise of safety waited, or danger even greater than before. She pulled herself up with his help, every muscle aching, her heart trembling like the storm around them. And as they stepped out into the rain, lightning split the sky, revealing for just an instant the path ahead, narrow, twisting, and lost among the rocks. She tightened her grip on his arm and whispered, "Get me out of here." He nodded once, silent as the thunder faded behind them. Together they disappeared into the storm, not knowing what waited beyond the next ridge, but certain that the night was far from over. The storm lingered through the night, chasing them across the rocky path that wound between the cliffs. The woman's breath came in sharp bursts as the wind whipped her hair against her face. She clung to the back of his horse, her fingers gripping the rough leather, her heart pounding with every thunderclap. The Apache warrior rode with calm precision, guiding the animal through the darkness as though he could see what the lightning revealed only for seconds at a time. The rain had turned to mist now, but the air still held that uneasy quiet that follows a storm, the kind that makes the world feel heavy and waiting. By dawn, the clouds had thinned, and the land opened into a wide valley, painted with pale morning light. Grass stretched in soft waves across the ground, and the air smelled of wet earth and sage. She looked around, dazed, her clothes damp and torn. For the first time, she could see his world, the wild, untamed land that belonged to no one and everyone all at once. It was beautiful, yet she felt so small in it, like a lost piece of another life that didn't fit here. He slowed the horse near a stream and helped her down. Her ankle throbbed as her foot touched the ground, but she tried to hide it. He noticed anyway and crouched beside her, checking the wrap she'd tied around it the night before. His hands were steady, his touch careful. "You walk slow," he said quietly. "We rest when sun high." She nodded, still catching her breath. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable now. It carried a kind of fragile trust that neither of them dared to break. She watched him wash his hands in the stream, the morning light glinting off the silver amulet around his neck. It looked old, carved with symbols she didn't recognize. She wanted to ask about it, but something about his expression stopped her. Instead, she said, "You live out here, all alone?" He glanced up from the water, his gaze steady. "My people gone. Some taken, some dead, some far north. I stay." The weight of those few words hung heavy in the air. She didn't know what to say, so she knelt beside him, cupping her hands to drink from the cold water. It was clean and sharp, like a reminder that she was still alive. As they sat there, she began to remember flashes of what had happened before the storm. The wagon circle, the sound of horses, the sudden chaos when the fire started, men shouting, women crying, and the riders who came out of the dark. The fear had been like a living thing that night. She couldn't tell who had attacked first or why. All she knew was that the world she'd built in her head, the promise of a new life out west, had shattered in an instant. She turned toward him, her voice uncertain. "Was it your people who came that night?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened slightly, and when he finally spoke, his tone was calm but distant. "Not my people. Some still fight. Some take what they need. The land is dying. Soldiers take more each year. Many lost their way." She felt a pang of guilt then, though she didn't fully understand why. Back east, she'd heard stories, terrible ones, told by men in uniforms and travelers who spoke of raids and danger. But no one ever spoke about what drove those men in paint and feathers to fight back. No one talked about the land they'd lost, or the promises broken, long before the settlers came. The warrior stood and tightened the horse's reins. "We move now," he said simply. They followed the stream until it curved into a grove of twisted pines that stood like sentinels against the wind. The earth here was softer, marked with faint tracks of deer and foxes. Every sound seemed sharper: the crack of branches, the cry of a hawk, the echo of her own heartbeat. She could tell he was listening to everything, reading the land like words on a page. When they stopped again, he led her to a narrow path that wound between two tall rocks. Beyond it, hidden by brush, was a small campfire pit, some dried meat hanging from a branch, a woven blanket folded neatly near a bed of pine needles. "This is where you live?" she asked softly. "For now," he said. She touched the blanket, surprised by its care. Every detail spoke of someone who had learned to survive in silence. He moved easily through the space, rebuilding the fire with practiced motions, setting a pot over it with bits of dried herbs. The smell rose slowly, earthy and comforting. She sat near the flames, rubbing her hands together for warmth. "You could have left me back there," she said after a while. "You didn't have to help." He looked at her from across the fire, his dark eyes unreadable. "No one left alone in storm," he said simply. His words struck something deep inside her. Maybe it was the way he said it, not as a gesture of kindness, but as a truth carved into the bones of survival. As the fire burned, he finally asked, "Why you travel west?" She hesitated, unsure how much to tell. "My family wanted land. We heard there were towns growing near the river. My father said it was a chance to start again, but she stopped, swallowing hard. He didn't make it." He nodded slowly, not asking for more. In his silence, she found more understanding than she'd ever felt from words. Hours passed as the fire dimmed. The wind outside carried a distant hum, low and steady, like drums echoing across the hills. He stiffened slightly, listening. "Others nearby," he said. Her heart jumped. "Soldiers." He shook his head. "Not soldiers." "My people." She froze. "Will they hurt me?" He looked at her for a long time, then said, "Some would not understand." "You wait here?" Before she could stop him, he disappeared into the shadows beyond the firelight. The night pressed close again, thick and uncertain. She sat there, staring into the flames, her thoughts racing. She didn't know whether to trust him fully yet, but she felt safer with him gone than she had alone. Still, the question lingered: what if he didn't come back? Minutes stretched into hours. Every sound outside made her flinch. She thought she saw shapes moving through the trees once, but when she blinked, they were gone. The fire crackled softly, and fatigue began to pull at her eyelids. Just as she started to drift, a voice cut through the dark. "Don't move." She froze, her heart thudding painfully. The voice wasn't his. It came from behind her ruff, accented and cold. A figure stepped closer, a rifle in his hands, the barrel glinting in the light. Another man appeared beside him, and then another. They wore buckskin and beads, their faces painted in deep streaks of red and black. "Who are you?" the first man demanded. She opened her mouth, but no words came. Then, from the trees, came the sound of a low whistle. The men turned sharply, their weapons raised. Lone Hawk stepped into the clearing, his face calm, but his eyes fierce. The tension between them was immediate, like two storms colliding. One of the men spoke quickly in their own tongue, gesturing toward her. The warrior answered, his voice low and firm. She couldn't understand a word, but she could feel the heat of their argument, the distrust, the anger. Finally, the others lowered their weapons, but their eyes stayed sharp. The leader spat something into the dirt and walked off, his men following into the shadows. The air was thick with silence when they were gone. She looked at him, trembling. "What did they say?" "They think I'd lose my mind," he said quietly. "They say no good comes from helping your kind." Her chest tightened at the words. She didn't blame them, not really. The world between their people was built on fear and blood. Still, it hurt to know she was seen as a danger just for being alive. He sat down by the fire, his shoulders heavy. "They watch us now. We go before dawn." She wanted to ask where they were going, but she didn't. She could tell he was carrying something heavier than just the weight of her survival. There was history in his eyes, a story that began long before she ever stepped onto the trail west. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind. Somewhere in the distance, the drums had started again, faint and haunting. She wondered if they were for celebration or warning. When the first light of dawn crept over the canyon, he was already saddling the horse. Out. The fire was out, and the air felt cold and still. She climbed up behind him, her fingers brushing the edge of his amulet. "What does it mean?" she asked softly. He didn't turn. "It means I am still here." They rode toward the mountains, their silhouettes swallowed by the rising sun. Behind them, smoke drifted from the valley where his people watched. Ahead, the peaks waited, sharp against the morning sky. And though she didn't know what dangers lay ahead, she could feel the truth pressing closer. The storm was only beginning. The mountains rose like dark giants ahead of them, their peaks hidden by drifting clouds. The air grew colder as they climbed, and every breath turned white in the morning chill. The woman pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her fingers numb against the leather reins. Lone Hawk rode in silence, his eyes scanning the horizon. He seemed to know every bend of the path, every shadow that passed between the rocks. Still, she could sense the weight pressing on him. Something in his posture had changed since that night when the other warriors confronted him. He was quieter now, distant, as though his thoughts had been carried away by the wind. The trail wound through pine trees and narrow ledges where the ground dropped sharply into unseen depths. Sometimes, when the wind shifted, she could hear faint sounds, bellowing water, breaking branches, the distant echo of wolves. It made her uneasy. Each sound reminded her that this was not her world, and that safety here was only an idea. By midday, they stopped near a flat ridge where a small stream cut through the stones. He tied the horse and knelt to refill his water skin. She followed, kneeling beside him. For a moment she thought she saw smoke rising far off in the valley behind them. "Are they following?" she asked. He looked over his shoulder, his face unreadable. Maybe, or maybe soldiers. Hard to know now. She felt a knot tighten in her chest. "What will they do if they find us?" He hesitated, then said, "They take you. They kill me." The words hit her hard. The fear she'd been pushing down since that night came rushing back. "Why don't you leave me then?" she whispered. He shook his head. Too late now. "You've seen too much, and they've seen you with me. No matter where you go, they come." She turned away, staring at the far-off plains. It didn't seem fair that her mistake, her survival, had placed him in danger. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling. "I know," he answered quietly. "But storm chooses who it spares." His words stayed with her long after they left the ridge. The land grew steeper, the path rougher. By the time the sun began to fall, her legs ached and her throat burned. Still, he pressed forward. It was nearly dusk when they reached a narrow valley cut between the cliffs. A few small huts stood near the riverbank below, their smoke curling faintly into the dim light. "This place safe?" she asked. He studied the huts before answering. "Old friends. Maybe." When they reached the camp, an older woman appeared from one of the huts. Her hair was streaked with silver, her face lined and strong. She looked at Lone Hawk, then at the woman behind him. No words were spoken at first, only a long, searching glance. Finally, the woman nodded and gestured for them to come inside. The warmth of the small fire hit her face as she stepped in. The hut smelled of pine and herbs. The older woman spoke softly in the Apache tongue, her tone both curious and cautious.
Ow.
Lone Hawk replied in short sentences. Though she couldn't understand their words, the tension was clear in their voices. When they finished speaking, the older woman handed her a bowl of broth. She ate slowly, her body finally relaxing as the warmth spread through her. Lone Hawk sat across from her, silent again. The flicker of the firelight carved sharp shadows across his face. After a while she said, "What did she say?" "She say you bring trouble," he replied. She lowered her gaze, feeling the sting of guilt. "She's not wrong." He looked at her then, his expression softening slightly. "Not your fault, just world's way." That night, she couldn't sleep. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, whispering in a voice that felt almost human. She lay awake listening to the sound of Lone Hawk and the older woman speaking quietly near the fire. Every now and then, she caught a word she understood: Soldier's Valley, danger, but most of it was lost to her. When the voices stopped, she closed her eyes, pretending to sleep. But the quiet didn't last. A noise came from outside, a faint rustle, like someone stepping through leaves. She sat up, her heart thudding. Lone Hawk moved to the doorway, bow in hand, his movements soundless. A moment later, he slipped outside. She followed, careful not to make a sound. The night was thick, moonlight falling in silver streaks through the trees. He stood near the edge of the camp, staring toward the dark ridge beyond the river. "What is it?" she whispered. He didn't turn. Tracks, not mine, not hers. Fresh, a cold shiver ran through her. "Do you think they found us?" He didn't answer right away, but his hand went to the amulet at his chest. "If they come tonight." They stayed awake the rest of the night, waiting. No one appeared, but the unease never left. When dawn broke, he was already packing what little they had. The older woman gave her a small pouch of dried herbs and a thin blanket. Before they left, she spoke to Lone Hawk again in her native tongue, her eyes filled with warning. As they rode away, the woman asked, "What did she say this time?" "She said, 'I walk with the wind,'" he answered. "And wind does not stay in one place." The meaning of his words lingered as they traveled deeper into the mountains. Days passed in silence. The land grew harsher, the sky wider. She began to notice the way he would pause sometimes, crouching to feel the ground or touch the bark of a tree. He seemed to listen to things she couldn't hear, signs written in the earth itself. One afternoon, as they rested near a patch of wild grass, she asked, "Do you ever wish you'd left all this behind? The fighting, the running?" Looked out toward the horizon. "I tried, but land remembers. You leave it, it finds you." She nodded slowly, unsure what to say. Then he added, "Before the war, I had family, 2 brothers. They'd gone now." She wanted to ask how, but his voice carried a quiet pain that told her not to. Instead, she said softly, "I'm sorry." He gave a small nod. "You lose people too." "Yes," she said. "Everyone I knew. Everyone I loved." Their eyes met then, and for a brief moment, the silence between them felt almost like understanding. It wasn't comfort, not yet, but it was something close. That night, they camped beneath a rocky overhang as a cold wind swept down from the peaks. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like 1,000 small fires. She sat near the flames, rubbing her hands together, while he sharpened an arrowhead beside her. "What happens when we reach the mountains?" she asked. He paused, looking into the fire. "We find the old trails, hidden places. Maybe there we wait until snow comes, and then," he shrugged slightly, "then we see what world brings." She watched him work, noticing how careful his hands were, how steady. There was a quiet strength in him that unsettled her as much as it reassured her. But the peace of the night didn't last. As the fire burned low, a faint sound rose from the distance, hooves on stone. Both of them froze. He stood quickly, eyes scanning the dark. "Soldiers," he said under his breath. She grabbed the blanket, her heart pounding. "How do they know where we are?" "Someone told them," he said. "Maybe from the valley." He kicked dirt over the fire and pulled her toward the horse. The sound grew louder now, echoing between the cliffs. They rode hard, the cold air biting their faces, the narrow path lit only by moonlight. The horse stumbled once, sending sparks of fear through her chest, but Lone Hawk steadied it with a quiet word. Behind them, the faint glow of torches appeared along the ridge. She turned to look, her stomach twisting. There were at least a dozen rider soldiers by the shape of their helmets, their shadows long against the rock. "Can we outrun them?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not long. We hide." They turned sharply down a narrow trail that led into a cluster of boulders and brush. He dismounted, pulling her down beside him. They crouched low, the sound of hoofbeats closing in. She pressed her hand against the cold earth, praying the darkness would hide them. The torches flickered closer, their light sweeping over the rocks. For a moment she thought one of the soldiers had seen them. The beam of light paused, hanging in the air. Then it moved on. The riders passed, their voices fading into the wind. She could feel her heartbeat slowing, her breath coming back. Lone Hawk didn't move until the last sound disappeared. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "They will not stop now." "What do they want?" she asked. "Not just you," he said. "They hunt me too. They think I lead them to something." "What?" He looked at her then, his eyes dark with secrets he hadn't yet shared. "2 gold or 2 ghosts. Maybe both." The words sent a chill through her. She didn't understand what he meant, but she knew it wasn't over. Whatever truth he carried, whatever the soldiers wanted, it had only begun to surface. And as the night deepened around them, the wind carried the faint cry of a coyote across the canyon, lonely, sharp, and endless. The next morning broke gray and cold. The wind swept through the canyon with a sharp whistle, carrying the smell of wet stone and pine. The woman woke to find Lone Hawk already awake, crouched near the edge of the ridge, watching the valley below. His horse grazed quietly nearby, steam rising from its nostrils in the chill air. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself and joined him, her heart still heavy from the chase that had haunted them through the night. "Do you think they're still out there?" she asked, her voice rough with sleep. He didn't answer right away. His eyes moved over the land, steady and unblinking. "They don't stop," he said finally. "Soldiers follow until they get what they want. They think I hide gold, old Apache gold from the mountain." She frowned, confused. "But there is no gold, is there?" Shadow passed across his face. "It's not the kind they think." He rose then, tightening the strap on his bow. "We move before the sun climbs higher. Tracks show easy in this light." They rode quietly for hours, the only sound, the creak of leather, and the distant cry of hawks overhead. The land was growing wilder, the trees thicker, the air thinner. Every few miles, Lone Hawk would stop, kneel, and study the ground. Once, he brushed aside a handful of leaves to reveal a fresh print of soldier's boot pressed deep into the mud. "They close," he said under his breath, fear twisted in her chest. "What will they do if they catch us?" He met her eyes for a moment, and she didn't need him to answer. She could see it in his expression, the same calm she had seen before storms, the quiet before violence. By late afternoon, the path narrowed into a rocky passage that wound between steep cliffs. The sky had darkened again, thick clouds rolling in over the peaks. The wind carried the low rumble of thunder, though the storm hadn't broken yet. Lone Hawk dismounted and led the horse by the reins, motioning for her to follow on foot. "This way," he said. "We hide higher. The soldiers don't climb this path." She followed, her breath shallow, her hands scraping against the rough rock as she climbed. The air smelled of rain and iron. Far below she could hear faint echoes, the distant ring of metal, the call of men. They were closer than before. When they reached the top of the ridge, she saw what looked like the ruins of an old stone shelter built into the mountain wall. The structure was small and worn, its entrance half buried by years of wind and dust. Lone Hawk pushed aside a pile of fallen branches and led her inside. It was cold and dim, but dry. The walls were covered in faded drawing symbols, animals, and the shapes of people, painted in red and black. The sight made her breath catch. "What is this place?" she whispered. "Old one," he said softly. "Before the white men came, my people prayed here for rain, for safe journeys." He looked at the markings with a strange reverence. "Now it is only stone and memory." She ran her fingers lightly over the drawings. The images told stories she couldn't read, but could feel the struggle, the spirit of a people holding on to their land. "It's beautiful," she murmured. He nodded, but said nothing more. Outside, thunder rolled again, closer now. The first drops of rain began to patter against the stone. He moved toward the entrance, keeping watch on the valley below. They'll look for us here, she said. We shook his head. Not yet. They think we keep moving. Rain hides our tracks. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the wind. Then she asked, Why do they think you know where the gold is? He didn't turn around. Long ago, soldiers came to take this mountain. They found caves, carved with signs. They thought it meant gold was buried inside. They killed for it. Burned villages for it, but they never found it. He paused. They never understood what the signs meant. She looked at the painted wall again, her voice soft. What do they mean? He turned toward her, his eyes dark and steady. It means the land itself is the treasure. The mountain feeds. The river gives life. But they only see what they can dig and carry away. The rain began to fall harder, the sound echoing through the rocks. Lightning flashed, lighting up the cave for an instant. In that flash, she saw something in his face, a sorrow deep and unspoken. Why do you stay here then? She asked quietly. If the land brings you so much pain, he looked out toward the storm. Because it's all that's left. The hours passed slowly as the rain poured outside. They shared what little food they had left, the air filled with the scent of wet earth. The woman sat against the wall, her thoughts heavy with everything she'd learned. She began to understand the world he came from, the quiet pride. The endless fight for survival against forces that never stopped pressing in. As night fell, the storm reached its height. The wind screamed through the cracks in the rocks, and thunder shook the ground beneath them. Then, through the noise, she heard something else faint but unmistakable. The echo of voices, men shouting against the rain. Her heart stopped. They're here. Lone Hawk stood immediately, bow in hand. He moved to the entrance, his silhouette outlined by flashes of lightning. Stay behind me, he said calmly. She crouched low, clutching the blanket to her chest. The voices grew louder, now English words mixed with curses and laughter. The glow of torches flickered beyond the trees below. The soldiers had found their trail after all. Lone Hawk stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he counted their numbers. Too many, he muttered. We can't fight here. Then what do we do? She whispered. He looked around the cave, scanning the walls as if searching for something. Then his gaze stopped on a dark crack near the back wall. There, he said. Old path. Goes deeper. She turned to look. It was narrow, barely wide enough to crawl through, but it descended into darkness. Are you sure? No, he said. But it's the only way. Outside, the sound of boots crunching against the rocks drew closer. The rain couldn't hide them any longer. Torches bobbed through the trees, their light spreading up the slope. He handed her a small knife. If they find you, use it, he said quietly. Her hand trembled as she took it. I don't want to fight. He gave her a look that was both fierce and kind. Then live. That's enough. Before she could answer, he motioned for her to move. They slipped into the narrow passage, just as the first shouts rang out from the ridge. The tunnel was cold and damp, the air thick with the smell of earth. She crawled forward in the dark, her hands scraping against stone. Behind her, she could hear him moving quietly, the sound of his bow brushing against the walls. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting deeper into the mountain. The roar of the storm faded until all she could hear was the sound of dripping water and her own heartbeat. She didn't know how far they'd gone when a faint light appeared ahead. She turned to whisper, Do you see that? He nodded. Keep moving. When they reached the end of the tunnel, they emerged into a wide cavern. It was larger than she could have imagined, its walls glittering faintly in the dim light that filtered through cracks above. Pools of water reflected the glow, and on the far side, she could see more drawings, hundreds of them, painted across the stone in deep colors. She stared in awe. This place, it's incredible. He stepped beside her, his expression unreadable. This is what they want, he said softly. It's not gold. Stories, the heart of my people. Before she could speak, a sound echoed from the tunnel behind them, boots, striking rock, voices growing closer. The soldiers had found the entrance. Lone Hawk turned sharply, stringing an arrow. They come. Panic gripped her chest. There's no way out. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the cavern. There is a way, high above, but you must climb. She followed his gaze and saw a narrow shaft of light far up the wall. It looked impossible, but it was their only chance. What about you? She asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he pressed the amulet from his neck into her hand. Keep this. It will guide you. She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. I can't leave you. You must, he said firmly. If they take you, they take everything I protect. The first gunshot echoed through the tunnel, sharp and final. Stone fragments scattered near their feet. She flinched, clutching the amulet tight. Go, he shouted. She turned toward the wall and began to climb, her fingers searching for holds in the slick rock. Behind her, she heard the twang of his bow, the shouts of soldiers, the ricochet of bullets, the air filled with smoke and the crack of gunfire. Her muscles burned, her breath came in gasps, but she didn't stop. She reached for the next ledge, the amulet cold against her palm. Below, flashes of light lit up the cavern as the fight raged on. She could hear him shouting, the soldiers closing in. At the top, she reached a narrow opening and pulled herself through into the open air. The night was alive with wind and thunder. She turned back toward the darkness below, her chest heaving. Lone Hawk, she cried out into the storm. But the only answer was the echo of gunfire fading deep within the mountain, swallowed by the storm. The rain had eased by dawn, leaving the air heavy and cool. Mist rolled off the mountains like slow-moving ghosts, wrapping the world in a pale silence. The woman sat on the ridge, her hands scraped and raw, her eyes fixed on the entrance below where the cavern had swallowed everything. She waited for hours, hoping for movement, for a shadow, for anything that might mean he had survived. Only the soft rush of the river below and the wind moving through the pines. Her body ached from the climb and from fear that had nowhere left to go. The amulet he had given her hung from her neck, damp and cold against her skin. She gripped it tightly, feeling the small carved symbols under her fingers. They were rough, uneven, but somehow alive. It was the last piece of him she had, and though she didn't yet understand it, it felt like more than a keepsake. It felt like a promise. As the light grew stronger, she made her way down the slope, following the narrow path until she reached the valley. Smoke drifted faintly in the air, a sign that the soldiers had been there. She moved carefully, staying hidden behind rocks and fallen trees. When she reached the edge of the clearing, her heart clenched. The ground was scarred with footprints and broken torches. A few torn pieces of cloth fluttered in the mud. But there were no bodies, no sign of who had lived or died. She called his name once, softly, but the wind carried it away. Somewhere deep in the mountain the echoes answered, faint and hollow. She stood there for a long time before turning back toward the trees. The world around her felt larger now, lonelier, yet beneath the grief there was something else, something steady and unspoken. She couldn't name it, but she felt it in her bones, the same way Lone Hawk had felt the mountain. Over the next few days she followed the river west, keeping close to the cliffs. She had no map, no supplies except what she could gather, but she kept moving. Each night she made small fires and listened to the sounds of the forest, the coyotes, the rustle of branches, the whisper of water against stone. It was as if the land itself was trying to speak to her, guiding her the way he once had. On the third morning she found herself near a small settlement. Smoke rose from a few chimneys, and the faint sound of voices carried through the fog. She hesitated at the edge, unsure if she should approach. The last time she'd seen uniforms, they had brought only death. But these people looked different, tired farmers, not soldiers. An old woman saw her first. She was gathering water from a well and paused when she noticed the stranger watching from the trees. After a long moment, she waved her closer. "You look like you've walked 100 miles, the woman said kindly. "I don't know how far I've come," she replied, her voice weak. "Then you should rest," the woman said. "Come inside." Inside the small wooden cabin, the warmth of the fire made her realize just how cold she had been. The woman gave her bread and broth, asking no questions at first. Only when she had eaten did she speak again. "You came from the mountains, didn't you?" She nodded slowly. "There was a man. He helped me. His name was Lone Hawk." The woman's eyes softened. "I've heard that name," she said quietly. "Some say he was the last to guard the old lands. Others say he's gone." The words struck hard, though she had already known the truth. He stayed behind, she said, her throat tightening. He fought for something they couldn't take. The woman reached across the table and touched her hand. Then he did what he was meant to do. Some people belong to the land more than to life. That night, as she lay by the fire, she couldn't sleep. The images of the cavern filled her mind, the glowing walls, the ancient drawings, the echo of his voice. She thought about what he had said, that the land itself was the treasure. She understood it now. What the soldiers sought wasn't gold or power. It was something they couldn't understand: connection, spirit, meaning. They had chased after the wrong thing, and it had destroyed them. When morning came, she thanked the woman and prepared to leave. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't return to her old life. The world she'd left behind was built on taking, on forgetting. Out here, every tree, every rock, every gust of wind reminded her that there was another way to live, one rooted in respect, not possession. As she followed the trail leading out of the valley, she noticed small signs along the way. A hawk feather caught in the brush, stones stacked neatly beside the path. They were simple, but each one felt like a message, as if someone or something wanted her to keep going. She smiled faintly and touched the amulet at her neck. Weeks passed before she reached the next town. Life there moved slowly, with people who lived by the rhythm of the seasons. She traded what few belongings she had for food, and began helping an old man who ran a stable. The work was hard, but it grounded her. Every night, she would step outside and watch the horizon, where the mountains rose in the distance, dark and eternal. Sometimes she thought she saw a hawk circling above those peaks, cutting through the sky with quiet grace. It gave her comfort, though she wasn't sure why. In time, she began telling people small parts of what she'd seen. Not the whole story, but enough. About the mountain, the sacred cave, the man who had stood his ground when others would have fled. Most listened in silence. A few didn't believe her. But one evening, as she told the story to a group of children by the fire, one of them asked, "Do you think he's still out there?" She looked into the flames for a long moment before answering. "Maybe not in the way you think," she said softly. "But he's part of this land now. When you feel the wind through the canyon, when you hear the river after the rain, that's him. He never left." The children were quiet after that, their faces lit by the flicker of the fire. And she realized that this was how stories lived on, not through monuments or gold, but through the telling, through memory. That was the real treasure, the kind that couldn't be stolen. Years went by. The war ended. The soldiers moved on, and new settlers came. The mountain remained untouched, wrapped in silence and mist. People whispered that it was cursed, that strange sounds came from within after dark. Few dared to climb it. But those who did sometimes found small things: a carved stone, a painted mark, a feather lying perfectly still on the ground. Signs of something sacred that refused to die. As for the woman, she stayed near the foothills for the rest of her life. She planted trees, tended the horses, and grew old watching the same horizon where her journey had begun. Every morning, she would touch the amulet around her neck before beginning her day. It had grown smooth from years of wear, its carvings faint but still there, like the memory of a voice carried on the wind. One spring morning, when the sky was clear and the fields were full of wildflowers, she walked farther than she usually did. The path took her to a ridge overlooking the valley. From there, she could see the mountain clearly, its peak catching the early sun. She stood quietly, feeling the weight of the years melt away. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "I told your story." And for a moment, she thought she saw something move, a figure standing among the trees, tall and still, watching her. A hawk cried overhead, its wings flashing in the light. She smiled, closing her eyes against the wind. When the people of the town found her later that day, she was sitting on the ridge, her face peaceful, the amulet resting over her heart. They buried her near the edge of the forest, facing the mountain. Seasons passed, the land healed. Grass grew over the old trails, and the ruins of the soldiers' camps disappeared. Yet sometimes, travelers passing through the valley would say they felt something in the air, a calm, a presence. They said that when the wind blew just right, they could hear faint voices. A woman's laughter carried through the trees, a whisper in the language of the old world. And somewhere high above, a lone hawk still circled the peaks, as if guarding what was left behind. The mountain kept its secrets, but its spirit endured, reminding those who listened that some stories are not meant to fade. They become part of the land, living quietly in every leaf, every stone, and every heart that dares to remember.